Hello everyone and welcome back to eCoreAcademy. My name is Anita and I'm going to be your Java teacher today for our lesson all about else-if ladders and nested conditionals. So in our last video we looked at what conditional statements are and specifically what if statements are. If statements are just a type of conditional statements. Remember, conditional statements are a process through which code is activated through decisions made by the computer. And this decision is made when a condition is met or evaluates to true. This decision is this block of code is skipped over if the condition is not met or if it's false. So today we're going to be exploring a little bit more into what if statements can do to us via else-if ladders. We're also going to look at nested conditionals, which are essentially just placing a conditional statement within another conditional statement. So placing an if statement within another if statement or within an else-if statement. Before we get into the video, I would really appreciate it if you all could like, subscribe, hit the post notification bell, drop a comment down below, and share using our socials. Okay everyone, let's dive right into what else-ifs are. Here you can see my notes, which are all commented out. Also included with if statements under the topic of conditionals are else-if and else statements. So let's first discuss what an else-if statement is. When the first if statement isn't met, so let's say you have a series of conditions, and let's say the first condition is listed via an if statement. And again, refer to the previous video if you need to learn a little bit more about if statements, but let's say that first if statement evaluates to false. It's not true, it's not met. Then what happens is the computer checks if the else if statement is met. So if that if statement is false, then you move on to the next statement, which is going to be an else if statement. It's almost like an alternative. So the computer is going to say, oh no, the first if statement is false. Let me check if the next statement is possibly true, and that next statement is an else if statement. Let me scroll over. Think of an else if like an otherwise or an alternative route that can be taken to modify the code output. So if the if statement's not met, if it's false, then the code underneath the if statement's not going to be activated. The computer is not going to take that route for its output. So if you move on to the else if statement after the if statement and yes, that condition evaluates to true, then it's like an alternate route that you can take to get to the same destination, which is some computer output. So then what happens is whatever code is under the else if statement, assuming that it's different from the code that was under the if statement, the else if code will be activated, and then that's how the output will be modified because the else if was met instead of the if. So the else if statement extends an if statement to execute a different statement if the original if statement evaluated to false. So like I just said, the else if statement kind of redirects the computer and the algorithm and the program to print out a different response by activating a different piece of code if the original if expression evaluated to false, and assuming that the else if statement instead evaluated to true. So let's move on to what an else statement is. When an if and else if statement are all false, let's say you go down an entire ladder full of if and else if statements and they're all false, none of the conditions are met, we revert to the else statement as a final or last resort. So usually if you have a ladder, you'll have an if statement at the top, then you'll have an n number of else if statements, and at the very end you will have a single else statement. That's usually how these ladders work. And if all of the previous statements evaluate to false, you'll go to the final statement, see if that possibly works. It doesn't require a specific condition to be met. It's really an umbrella. So let's say you go through all the previous statements that all evaluate to false, and the computer's like, what do I possibly make the output? None of the conditions of the previous if statements or else if statements were met. Well, then it goes to the else statement, and else statement's like, if all else fails, just use me and activate the code underneath me. So that's essentially what an else statement is. It's an umbrella for all the possibilities that were false are not covered by the previous conditional statements. So like I said here, all other possibilities not accounted for in if/else/if fall under else statements. So now let's get into what the else-if ladder is, which is the main focus of this lesson. An else-if ladder occurs when we make a series of conditions down a list like a ladder. So if we have an if statement and then some n number of else-if statements and then an else statement, it's like a ladder. You're just going down a list and seeing does the input that was given to the computer match any of these. The ladder consists of first an if, then else if, then one else at the very end, like I said. The computer checks each condition as it works its way down the ladder. So it kind of works in chronological order down the ladder, deciding if the condition is met, and if it is met, it'll branch off towards whatever code was under that conditional statement. If it's false, it'll just move down the next rung of the ladder. If the condition is met, the computer stops going down the ladder and executes the task as instructed by the condition it met. If the condition isn't met, the computer continues down the ladder until it satisfies some condition. When we make these ladders, we need to group values or inputs that will make the computer give the same output. So typically, if there's some value that's going to give it a specific output, we'll put that under an if statement or an else if statement. With number ranges, we need to start with the most specific and broaden the scope as we go down the ladder. So your first if statement is going to have the most specific outcome. Let's say you're doing a grading scale, and anything above a 90 is an A. Well, that's the most specific condition, so it would go first. Then let's say anything above an 80 is a B. That's the next condition it would go in the second statement, which would be an else if statement. So really, you're going from most specific to broadening it as you work towards the else statement at the bottom. Essentially, that's a really quick rundown of how else if ladders work. I want to show you a quick example of an else if ladder using some code I actually wrote. You don't have to understand how this code is written yet. I just wanted to write it out for you to give you an example. You can see keyboard reader was imported because we are getting user input and we're declaring an integer called number. We're going to print out that question, pick a number between 1 and 15, and then whatever the user enters will be stored in the integer number. If the user enters a number that's less than or equal to 5, we'll print out your color as red. Let's say this is false. Let's say that the user does not enter a number that is less than or equal to 5. If this evaluates to false, we're going to go down the ladder to the next statement, which is an else if statement. If the number is less than or equal to 10, your color is blue. Let's say this is also false. We'll go to the third statement and check if this is true. It's another else if statement. And if it's less than or equal to 15, your color is yellow. So if the first statement evaluates to false, saying the number is not less than or equal to 5, then it immediately broadens to the range in the next statement from 10 to 5. So that's how an else if statement works. And then finally, if the number is not even in the range, we kind of use this else statement to broaden the umbrella. And you can just say you can pick your own color. That's what the computer just says. So I'm going to hit play to run this code for you. Just give the console a second. So pick a number between 1 and 5. Let's say I pick the number 1 and 15. Sorry, I say 3. So your color is red, which matches the first statement. Let's say I run it again. I pick the number 8, which doesn't satisfy the first statement, but does satisfy the second, so my color is blue. Let's say I pick the number 12. Your color is yellow, which satisfies the third statement. And let's say I just pick the number 24, which is completely out of the range. You can pick your own color. So that's essentially how an else if ladder works. Next, I want to get into nested conditionals, which is going to be very quick, but essentially a conditional within a conditional, or an if statement within another if statement, or within an else if statement. Once the outer condition is met, meaning the outer if or else if is met, then you're going to go inside of that to see what code is in there, and inside that inner code there will be another conditional statement, most likely an if statement. You go inside and repeat the same branch decision-making process, and you see which of the inner conditions fits. This might be better explained with a piece of code, so I'm going to copy and paste it here for you. So in this piece of code, you'll see that the integer num is declared, and we're going to print out, pick a number between 1 and 10, and then whatever the reader enters is going to be stored in the integer num. If the number that the user enters is less than or equal to 5, then this first if statement evaluates to true, and we go inside to see what the code is. And let's say the user entered, 2. That would satisfy this outer if statement. We would go inside to see what the code says. If that number is also less than or equal to 3, then we would print out this statement. However, if that number is greater than 3, but it's less than or equal to 5, we would print this out. So if you see, there's a conditional statement within a conditional statement. If the number is not less than or equal to 5, we're not even going to have to worry about this code. We won't even go in here. This whole thing, I'm actually drawing an X with my cursor, but it's going to evaluate to false, and then we're going to continue to our next else if statement, and then to our else statement if this else if is also false. So let me run this code for you. First, let me delete this code up here. Let me delete this so it doesn't interfere. going to run this code. Pick a number between 1 and 10. Let's say I pick the number 2. Your color is red. Let's say I run this again, which satisfies this if statement here. Let's say I pick the number 4. Your color is pink. And lastly, let's say I pick the number 9. Your color is blue. And then for any extraneous kind of entry, 12, your color is yellow. So that is essentially how this nested conditional works. Yep. Alright, that's all I have for the video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please make sure to like, subscribe, hit the post notification bell, drop a comment down below, and share using our socials. I hope you'll join me in my next lesson, which is all about booleans and some other things to wrap up conditionals. Bye!